Good morning, my friend. I'm Dr. Lee Warren, hopefully your favorite internet brain surgeon and real life brain surgeon too. But we're here for another episode of the Spiritual Brain Surgery Podcast. I'm so grateful to have you listening. I would invite you to subscribe to the show wherever you listen, whether it's on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever else. If you're listening to the show, please hit that subscribe button. Make sure you don't ever miss an episode. And check out my newsletter, drleewarren.substack.com, every Sunday. Since 2014, I've been giving you my best prescriptions for how you can change your mind and change your life. Starting today, that's drleewarren.substack.com. This is Spiritual Brain Surgery. It's the podcast where we go a little bit deeper on the faith side of the equation. We talk a lot about science and how neuroscience and faith work together to help us overcome all the challenges and stresses and massive things and traumas and dramas and all that of life. And over on the Self-Brain Surgery podcast, we go a little deeper on the science side. But here on Spiritual Brain Surgery, we dig deeper into the faith side so we can understand exactly what it is that this life looks like when we're trying to hold on to faith and find resilience and have hope no matter what we're facing. And today, I want to give you an unusual episode. This is probably the first time I've ever done this, but I had a conversation on the podcast that I'm going to release in about 3 days that you'll be able to hear on the Self-Brain Surgery podcast with Rick Burgess. Now, if you don't know who Rick is, you might know him by his radio name. For 30 years, he was the Rick half of a radio broadcasting duo called Rick and Bubba. And if you lived in Alabama or in the South, especially like I did for a long time, Rick and Bubba was a daily part of your drive time to work. For hundreds of thousands of us, maybe millions of us, we listened to Rick and Bubba every day. And I remember in 2008 hearing the news in Alabama that over in Birmingham, Rick's little 2-year-old son, Bronner, had drowned and died. And everybody was so overwhelmed with grief on behalf of Rick because we loved him, because we heard him every day. And I remember I actually wrote into the radio station with condolences about that. Back in the day, it was just a moving thing. And I never knew at that time that I would face the same problem of losing my son just 5 years later in 2013. So I knew who Rick was. I didn't know his last name was Burgess until recently. Hadn't thought about that in years. But then I got pitched from a publicity firm that I actually used for my new book, MMPR, that they're handling the PR for my new book that's coming out. And Jana Munsinger reached out to me and said, hey, I've got an author that's got a book coming out. You've probably heard of him, Rick from Rick and Bubba. And he's got a book called Men Don't Run in the Rain. It's a memoir about his dad, a biography type book from biblical lessons that he learned from his dad's life. And I thought, what a great opportunity to talk to somebody that I've listened to for years and get his take on his father and his life and all these lessons, but also maybe about the conversation about losing sons and going through grief and tragedy and all that stuff. Rick and I had an incredible conversation, and I think it'll be part one of another conversation. We really hit it off, and it was one of the most sort of natural conversations I've ever had. I felt like I'd known him for years, maybe because I've heard his voice for so many years. But we really had a rapport, and we went deep and had a great conversation. I can't wait for you to hear that on Friday. But the more I thought about it, I thought about Rick's story of his dad's legacy and how his dad left this just indelible mark on the world and on everybody, literally everybody that interacted with Bill Burgess was affected by him. He's one of those guys that you could just, from Rick's words on the page, you could feel yourself being influenced by this great man. And so I thought maybe for Spiritual Brain Surgery today, it would be worth kind of diving in a little bit to some of the lessons that Rick taught us in that book. I highly encourage you to read it. Men Don't Run in the Rain. It's available everywhere books are sold. You can actually get a signed copy. Go to Rick's website and reach out through the contact form, Rick Burgess Show. Rick Burgess, that's 2 S's in Burgess, and then the word show, so 3 S's in a row, rickburgessshow.com. You can reach out to him and actually arrange to have a signed copy obtained if you'd like to do that. In time for Father's Day, maybe give one to your dad. It was just such a great conversation, and I thought we didn't have time to get into all the lessons, and then the more I thought about it, I've learned so much from my dad. My father's one of these larger-than-life characters too, and all of us have been marked by the people who raised us, whether for good or for bad. And so I thought maybe that would be a good sort of topic to dive into a little bit with you for Spiritual Brain Surgery today. So we're going to talk about Men Don't Run in the Rain, lessons I learned from Rick Burgess and other dads. And we're going to talk a little bit about how your mind and your brain work together to kind of manage your life, and how the people who raised you have a mark on that direction that you take for good or for bad. And if you realize it or don't realize it, it can make a huge difference in how your life plays out. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go deep on Men Don't Run in the Rain, lessons I learned from Rick Burgess and other dads on the Spiritual Brain Surgery podcast. Let's get after it. When life gets hard, does what we think we believe hold us up, or does it crumble under the weight of doubt? I'm Dr. Lee Warren, your host, and this is Spiritual Brain Surgery, where we'll take a hard look at what we believe, why we believe it, and the neuroscience behind how our minds and our brains can work together to help us build a bulletproof faith that will withstand anything life throws at us. Whether you're struggling with anxiety, grief, doubt, or you just want to go deeper into the big questions we all have, remember, you can't change your life until you change your mind, and sometimes it takes spiritual brain surgery to get it done. So let's get after it. Friend, I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to sit down, or you might be driving or working out or whatever you're doing, but I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to dig deep into ideas and thoughts and to look at life together and figure out how we can make this thing called life a little bit more manageable. Because Jesus said in two places, at least two places, John 10:10, he said, "The thief comes to steal and kill and destroy, but I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly." And in John 16:33, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world." There's trouble, okay? And one of the things that we know that we can do when we have trouble is turn to other people. That's why the Bible tells us not to forsake assembling. That's why it says two are better than one. A cord of three strands is not quickly broken. The neuroscience is very clear that loneliness is as deadly as heart disease. Like, you need other people in your life to help you process and understand things. And so when we think about our life as a whole, one of the things that's just incredibly important to realize is the role that other people play in shaping us, our personality, our worldview, the way we look at things. Rick Burgess's book, Men Don't Run in the Rain, a son's reflection on life, faith, and an iconic father, has got me thinking about this. I heard a story the other day, and I talked about it on Instagram. By the way, if you're not following me on Instagram, at Dr. Lee Warren, Dr. Lee Warren, at Dr. Lee Warren on Instagram. That's also my handle or username on Facebook and on TikTok. On Twitter, I got hacked, and some cryptocurrency scammer stole my Dr. Lee Warren account on Twitter. So if you're on Twitter and you see my face and the name Dr. Lee Warren, it's not me, but don't invest money. I'm not out there recommending get rich quick scams, but somebody stole my identity on Twitter and I can't use that. So I have DOC Lee Warren, at Doc Lee Warren on Twitter. I'm really active on Instagram, though. That's my number one place. We also have Dr. Lee Warren on YouTube. We're growing rapidly. I'd love it if you'd help us to grow the YouTube channel. So subscribe there. We're putting every episode, essentially all of the self-brain surgery episodes are on video format now, and the Spiritual Brain Surgery Show is going to become more and more video heavy as time goes on, is the plan. But basically, I told a story on Instagram the other day that I heard first from a guy named Sahil Bloom, who writes a newsletter that I read every week. And Sahil Bloom told this story that he heard at a graduation speech from somebody else. So this is the game of telephone by now. I'm giving it to you third hand. But the story really stuck with me. He said these two young fish were swimming through the ocean, and they came upon an older fish. And as the older fish passed them, he tipped his cap and he said, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two fish kept on going. The fish kept on swimming. And then one of them turned to the other one and said, "What's water?" And it just dawned on me that sometimes we're swimming through life. We never stop to think about the fact that we are in an environment. We're swimming through water. We never stop to think about the water that we're swimming through, even though it provides for us, sustains us, gives us life. Everything we need is in this environment. We don't stop to think about the fact that we are in an environment. And one of the things Rick's book did for me, the Men Don't Run in the Rain idea about learning from your father and reflecting on lessons that you learn over the course of a life from your father or from a seminal figure in your life. One of the things it did is made me realize that all of us have a particular way that we look at the world. And a set of guiding principles or ideas or beliefs or stories, sometimes limiting stories, that we sort of are baked in, we're swimming in, that are going to define the baseline way in which we look at the world. The filter, the lens through which we see everything is shaped by other people, whether or not we ever stop to think about it. Now, an important point that Rick makes in the book that I want to make here is that not everybody had a good dad, okay? Not everybody had a good mom. Some people listening might be orphaned, might be from a home where there was abuse, might be from a broken home where there was no couple, maybe never had a dad in the first place, or maybe had a series of stepdads, maybe some of them were abusive. Nevertheless, whatever your situation is, even if you didn't have a father you could look up to or a mom you could look up to, somebody raised you. And that set of somebody's or those two people or that one person, whoever raised you, puts you in an ocean. And that ocean is the water you're swimming in your life. And just about everything that you think, feel, believe, and do is colored in some way by that water that you're swimming in. Okay? Now, Rick Burgess, his dad, Bill, was a strong, sort of iconoclastic type of guy. And my father, Wayne Warren, Wayne Sr., I'm Wayne Lee Warren Jr. That's why you see me professionally use W. Lee Warren, MD, because I'm a junior. My parents are one of those sets of parents that named two of their kids and then called them by their middle name. So I was Wayne Lee Warren Jr., but I was raised being called Lee. And my sister, Sharon Michelle, was raised being called Michelle. And so that's a problem when you're in the military, by the way, because the military refuses to call you by anything other than your first name. So the whole time I was in the Air Force, on every paper, every document, every time my name got called, every time I received a set of orders, it was Wayne Warren. And I would always have to say, yeah, my name's Wayne, but call me Lee. Everybody calls me Lee. And so don't do that to your kids. I'm just kidding. It worked out fine for me. And so the first of probably 5 points that I want to make today with you, is that you are in an environment and the way you see the world and everything about how you experience the world is shaped by other people, even if you don't realize it. Now, here's the most important lesson, okay? That can either be something that defines you and continues to cause you trouble throughout your life because you fall into problems and snares and traps and you frame everything in a certain way and it affects your relationships, your relationship with God and everybody else. And you never stop to think about the fact that it's possible to change the water you're swimming in. It's possible. So if you continue to find trouble in your life, if you have what we call an external locus of control from the neuroscience side, and we talk about this on the other show all the time, if you have an external locus of control, then you will blame, you'll look backwards, you'll feel yourself stuck in cycles of shame and numbing and regret and all of that stuff, and you'll keep blaming your current reality on your past environment. But the problem is, and God revealed this to me in a pretty dramatic fashion one time, I'll tell you the story in a second, but the problem is that once you learn the science that your mind and your brain are not the same thing and that God can renew your mind, in fact, if you've accepted Christ, He has renewed your mind, but you don't necessarily live that way unless you realize that you can separate mind and brain. And if you're stuck in a particular pattern, once you recognize that pattern is not helping you, you can change the pattern. Here's a story from something I've told you before. I've told people in my newsletter and podcast in the past about this story, but there was a relative of mine, a person who had a huge impact on me, and one of that person's key character traits and things that they valued more highly than any other thing in every interaction of my whole life with them was about integrity, about personal integrity. And so everything about this person related to you are who you say you are, even when nobody's looking. Your character and your integrity have to be unimpeachable all the time. I heard this person say 1,000,000 times to me, you can build your reputation. It takes your whole life to build a reputation, but it takes 1 second to lose it, all that kind of stuff. And Lisa and I had a business situation where we had to deal with this person, and even though we're family, we had to deal with them in a business environment. And it involved the third family member. And it became clear as we went along that the business engagement had been couched in a sort of dishonest way by this person that I look up to so much, that has so much integrity and has always been so keying on how integrity is so important. And we investigated a little bit more clearly and more deeply, and we realized that there had been a lie told in the process of this business engagement. And the funny thing was, it was a lie that wouldn't have mattered. We were still going to take care of, we were going to do our part. We were going to come through with what we had promised and what we agreed to do. And we never would have changed that, even if they had told us the truth about what was going on. But it appeared, in fact, it was, after we called it out, this is what it was. Like they were afraid that we wouldn't go through with the deal if we knew the truth about what the deal was that they had lied about. And so it just really broke me, and it made me really angry and bitter, and I felt like I'd been misled, and then it made me question a lot of things from my life, and I was looking backwards and thinking about all this stuff. And then I remember very clearly one of the few times that God's ever spoken to me in a way that was really direct and crystal clear. That night, as I was struggling to sleep over this, I got a very clear message from the Lord. And the message was, Lee, that situation was their fault. It was their fault. They were wrong. I'm going to deal with them on it. You made it, you brought it to light. You're aware of it now. You know the truth of it. That was their fault. And how you feel right now is because of what they did. And it's okay that you feel that way. You should feel hurt. You should feel angry. You should feel broken and all that stuff. But it was their fault. But tomorrow, if you're still upset and you're still stuck and you're still questioning, then it's your fault, because you can forgive and you should forgive, and you've told lies before, and you've hurt people before, and you've not kept your word before. And so tomorrow, if you don't move forward and let me handle this, and you don't move forward and still be the same person you are, and still be grateful for all the good things about that relationship and all the millions and millions of times they've done right by you, if you let this one situation define everything, it's going to hinder you in your life, and it's going to be your fault. And so the lesson I learned was that you can't allow tomorrow and your future to be colored and defined by failures or faults in the past that other people did, because that will poison the water that you're swimming in going forward. Let that current take that stuff away and go backwards away from you, and go forward in the light of all the things that are good, the grateful for the things that you have, the ways that you learn to see the world through them. And if it's true that you didn't have anything good that you had from your father or your mom or the people that raised you, if there truly was nothing good, then at least go back and ask yourself some questions. Somebody put clothes on your back. Somebody put food in your mouth. Somebody made sure you got to school. Somebody did that. So even if they were faulty people, aren't you a faulty person too? And I'm not saying to forget egregious things that may have happened. If you were abused or something terrible happened like that, I'm not saying you can forget that, okay? But find a way to change your story, to re-story your life so that the water around you isn't poisoned and isn't being made more toxic by stuff that's no longer necessary for you to be living in its truth going forward in the future, because you can change the water you're swimming in, okay? So one thing I learned from Rick's book about his father is that there are no perfect people, but you can learn lessons and values and ways to look at the world from the people who raised you. And you can take those things and use them to build a life going forward that's helpful to you. And so the first lesson here is just to recognize that you're in an environment in your life that was shaped and colored by the people who raised you, okay? Fortunately for me, I was raised in a good home with a loving set of parents and a really strong father who taught me a lot. My mom and my dad put me in the Word. Rick's father did the same thing for him, and that's a good thing. But understand that the way you look at the world is shaped by those who raised you. But it doesn't have to be the way that you go forward. You can change the water you're swimming in. That's the first lesson. The second lesson is similar. In fact, it's an extension of this first one. But the second lesson is about honoring your father and mother. The last chapter of Rick's book goes into all the different places in the Bible where the commandment to honor your father and mother. First in Exodus 20, verse 12, honor your father and mother that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And that was the first commandment with a promise. So you get honor your father and mother and things will go better for you. It sounds pretty important. And Rick talks about this. Jesus brings it back in Matthew 15, 4 through 7. He brings it up in Matthew chapter 19. He brings it up numerous times where the idea of honoring your father and mother, but nowhere ever does it say as long as they were good, as long as they were nice, as long as they did things the right way. So what it says Rick says, focus on what the commandment says and what it doesn't say. The commandment very specifically says, honor your father and mother, honor them. It doesn't say like them. It doesn't say condone their actions. It doesn't say make up stories about their past that aren't true. It doesn't even say you have to love them. It says you have to honor them. Now, what does that mean exactly? So Rick says it this way. The commandment to honor your parents means that you and I should live our lives in such a way that when people know they are our parents, it brings honor to them, whether we think they deserve it or not. It's a commandment for how we should live our lives, not a commentary on how they lived theirs. Let me read that again. Honor your father and mother, Rick Burgess says, is a commandment about how you should live your life, not about how they lived their life. Rick says, we have a life to live that brings honor to our heavenly Father in such a way that it also brings honor to our earthly father. And this is a paragraph. We actually said this. I read this verbatim and asked him to comment on it in the full interview that you'll hear later this week on the Self-Brain Surgery podcast. But I want to read it here just in case you don't hear the other show. Here's a paragraph from Rick Burgess about this idea of honoring your father and mother. Rick says, if your dad was a terrible husband, then you be a great husband. If your dad was a terrible daddy, then you be a great daddy. If your dad was a joke as a grandfather, then be the best grandfather your grandchildren have ever seen. If your dad left, you don't leave. If your dad was violent, then you be gentle. If your dad was absent, then you be present. Be an honorable man or woman. If your dad didn't follow Jesus and lead his family to the foot of the cross, then you repent. Confess Jesus as Lord. Bathe your family in prayer and the word of God and lead them to the foot of the cross. You be the spiritual leader he never was. Finally, forgive your dad. This doesn't mean that what he did was okay. This doesn't mean that what he didn't matter. It just means that you love Jesus enough not to deny the grace and forgiveness to your dad that Jesus so freely gives you. That's Rick Burgess. Listen, friend, if your dad was abusive, if he did things, if he abandoned you, if he was not an honorable person, then the commandment to honor your father and mother does not mean that you pretend those things weren't true. What it means is you live your life in such a way that people say, boy, your parents are sure blessed for you to be their child. Your parents are sure honored by the way you're living your life. That's the commandment. And you can do that regardless of the type of upbringing that you had, regardless of the water that you're swimming in. You can decide you're going to be a forgiving person. You're going to show up. You're going to be present. You're going to be patient. You're going to be godly. You can break that generational curse, as we've talked about a million times on this podcast. You can let it stop with you. That's one of our 10 commandments of self-brain surgery. Refuse to let generational issues persist into the future and surely refuse to start new ones. Okay, that's the second lesson. Your parents may not be perfect, but God calls you to honor them. The third one is that gratitude overwhelms overwhelm. When you're overwhelmed and stressed and frustrated and you start thinking those thoughts, when the devil leads you into that place of mind where you start thinking that nothing in your life is good and you wish you'd been born into a different family in a different time, or you had a different set of circumstances and all these things would be better, you start thinking that way. The only way out of that is to take command of your thoughts, as 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, to do the self-brain surgery work of biopsying your thoughts and rectifying the perception to the reality, to say, okay, if I had a set of circumstances that were adverse, the only way forward is to change my mind about what I'm going to do with my life going forward and to learn the lessons. I can mine the past for lessons without letting it set the GPS on the course I have to take for the future. Does that make sense? So gratitude then is this switch in our nervous systems that we talked about before that switches us up into this frontal lobe place of being able to make good decisions, make good plans, be rational and resilient and all that stuff. So we're going to use gratitude as the switch. So whenever we start to feel stressed or sad or ashamed of our past, we're going to try to find some things that we can be grateful for. Somebody put clothes on my back. Somebody gave me an opportunity. Somebody taught me how to speak English. Somebody taught me how to hold a spoon. So there were some things back there that I did manage to navigate, that somehow God got me through, that somehow somebody was there to do those things for me. So I'm going to use gratitude not as a way to pretend like the past didn't happen, but to help me orient to the future that can be better than the one that I've already lived through. Does that make sense? That's number 3. Gratitude overwhelms overwhelm. And number 4, again, this is something that Rick talked about in his book, and he talked about it in the episode that you can hear later this week on the Self-Brain Surgery podcast. But he tells a story And would you have that experience that nobody wants to have when their son Bronner died, like when our son Mitch died? Nobody wants to have that happen to them. And Rick had the dark, heavy, awesome responsibility, but also great responsibility to eulogize his own son, as I did. Rick spoke at his son's funeral. I wrote my son's eulogy, but I could not speak. But Rick did. And he stood up and he gave a eulogy, and somebody videoed it and put it on YouTube. And that video was the most viewed video on YouTube for the entire week in 2008 that that funeral occurred. Rick Burgess's words influenced millions of people. So in his darkest moment, he was able to stand up and deliver a message that inspired and encouraged people all over the world and was viewed millions of times. Okay, now that's the story that's public. Now here's the backstory that I don't know how many times Rick has told until this book has come out, and now he's told all of us. Rick said his dad, who was this legendary figure, this untouchable man, this giant of a football legend in Alabama, comes to him after the funeral in tears and can barely hold himself together. And Rick's dad looked at him after he had delivered the eulogy, after Rick had delivered the eulogy for his son. And he pointed at him and said, "Now that's a man." And for Rick Burgess, his father, that calling somebody a man means that you see in them leadership, character, grit, integrity, Christ-likeness, strength. You see the ability to not run in the rain, to stand up into the hardest moments of your life and deliver when you have to. That's what Bill Burgess saw in his son Rick that day. And he said, "Now that's a man." Now, there's something about this when you're raised by a legendary figure like I was. My father is this larger than life kind of guy. And in our small town in Oklahoma, he was legendary for his integrity and for his business ethic and for his kindness and for the way he looked out for everybody and taught Sunday school and led people and served on boards and was just always there for everybody. And when you're raised by that kind of a figure, when you get to a point in your life where that person sees you as an individual and calls out something about you that they respect or admire, it's this rite of passage that you have somehow graduated in your father's eyes or your mother's eyes or the person who you respect the most. And they say, "Now there's a man, there's a woman, there's a person, there's somebody I'm proud of." It does something that's healing in your heart. And if you haven't had that experience, if nobody in your life, friend, has ever pointed at you and said, "Now there's a man, now there's a woman, now there's my child who I'm proud of," if you never had that experience, I want you to recognize that God sees you in that way. That there's going to be a time when you get to hear your Father, the one who created you, the great physician, the one who crafted everything about you, who set you apart, who called you by a name that only He has, who tattooed His name on the palm of your hand. That God is going to look at you someday and say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Welcome, a good and faithful servant." I want you to hold on. If you didn't get to hear those words in your life from somebody who matters to you, know that they are coming. If you pursue this type of life where you're continuing to try to learn and grow and change and help and share with others and lead by example and do your best to steward the gifts and talents that you've been given, then someday you'll get to hear, "Well done. Now there's a man, now there's a woman, there's my kid. That's the person I'm proud of." I'm so grateful. The Bible says in Hebrews chapter 12, there's a great cloud of witnesses that are cheering you on. And that's why it says, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out before us. So the idea, you're working for something that matters in your life. You have meaning, you have purpose, you're here to make a difference. Your life matters. And even if you had a bad father, or even if you had a difficult circumstance, even if you've gone through some kind of trauma or tragedy or other massive thing, friend, you are running a race and somebody is waiting at the finish line for you, and they're going to say, "Now there's a man, now there's a woman, there's my friend, there's my kid, there's my child. I'm so proud of you. Well done." That's a lesson that we learned from Rick's book, from his dad, I hope from your dad, but if not, there's coming a time when you're going to get to hear that. You press in there and work hard, you'll get there. They're going to get to the point where you will get to the point where he says, "Well done." That's what I'm praying for you. And the last thing I want to talk to you about is the value of influenceability, of being able to be influenced by somebody outside of you. Our culture right now basically is telling everybody that whatever you think or feel, or whatever you think you identify as, or whatever your personality trait is, or whatever your Enneagram scores, or whatever, that's the truth for you. And that everyone else should bend to that idea. That everybody's saying, hey, you just do you. You do you. You feel your feelings, you think your thoughts, you live your life, and everybody else have to give way to you and accommodate you and all of that stuff. That's not a biblical idea. The biblical idea is that your heart and your mind is not particularly reliable when it comes to setting your own course. That there are some ways that you can be misled. There's some places where you can think the wrong stuff. And that's why it's so important to have people around you to help and guide and advise and be part of your team. We're not meant to do this alone. Like the Bible is full of verses, Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, which means mind, and lean not on your own understanding. Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Isaiah 55:8-9, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. 1 Corinthians 3:18, don't deceive yourselves. If any of you think you're wise by the standards of this age, you should become fools so that you can become wise. Proverbs 28:26, whoever trusts in his own mind is a fool. Another translation says, whoever trusts in his own mind is stupid, but he who walks in wisdom will be delivered. That's a self-brain surgery verse. Romans 12:3, right after the don't conform but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, 12:3 says, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith that God has distributed to you. You see what I'm saying? 2 Corinthians 3:5, not that we are competent in ourselves to claim anything for ourselves, but our competence comes from God. John 15:5, apart from me, you can do nothing. Proverbs 14:12, there is a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to death. Why am I reading all these verses to you? I'm reading all these verses to you to say this. There's some times when you think that you've got it all figured out and that you don't need anybody's advice. You don't need to model yourself after anybody else. You don't need to let anybody else influence you. And sometimes that idea can lead you astray, and you can end up struggling and being frustrated in your life. But when you have a person in your life who influences you, who you are willing to submit to their wisdom, and that's what a father is supposed to be, okay? If you don't have a dad like that, though, get you some people in your life who you can trust, who know the Lord, who are sound thinkers, who aren't judged by who aren't overwhelmingly influenced by their emotions, but they use their frontal lobes to make good decisions. Learn from some people. Be willing to submit to leadership and authority. Be willing to be mentored. Be willing to grow and learn, listen to podcasts and read books and get ideas from outside yourself, because by yourself, you're not going to make the best decisions all the time. Now, that's not saying that we aren't able to get wise and to become wise and to learn more and to ultimately become really good decision makers and leaders in our own right. Of course we are. We're supposed to do that. But at the same time, we have enormous blind spots when it comes to our own capabilities, our own insights, our own judgments. That's why I bounce so many things off Lisa. That's why I bounce so many things off Tata and my mom and dad. It's why I have people in my life who I can say, hey, am I thinking clearly about this? Even with surgery, I'm a senior neurosurgeon. I hate to say that now. I always said I was a young neurosurgeon. Then it dawned on me one day that I was a mid-career neurosurgeon, and now I realize, hey, I'm 56 years old. There's guys my age that are starting to think about retiring in a few years. Like I'm not a beginner anymore. But even though I'm extremely experienced, I've got combat under my belt, I've done thousands and thousands of surgeries, and I'm a good doctor, even though I still reach out to colleagues frequently and send them images and bounce cases off of them. My friend Jerry Grant's the chief of neurosurgery at Duke University. I text him and call him several times a year and say, hey, I don't have a partner, I'm in solo practice. Would you just look at this case and make sure I'm thinking correctly about this? I send messages to my friend Mickey Katsier, my friend Chase Woodward, my friend Pete Lennerson, who went to Iraq with me. We were over there together. They're senior neurosurgeons. Chase Woodward's an orthopedic spine surgeon, but I send them cases and I say, hey, would you look at this? Here's what I'm thinking. Am I thinking right about this? Am I making a good decision? Am I doing the right thing? I'll text Bill Thorell or somebody who does aneurysms or some brain tumor specialist somewhere frequently and say, just check this. Just make sure that I'm doing the best thing for my patient. Why do I do that? because I recognize that if I was in an academic center, if I stayed in Pittsburgh, for example, and stayed on faculty at Allegheny and just practiced there, those guys never, essentially never, make a decision without multiple other neurosurgeons weighing in on it, because they have all these conferences, and we have tumor board, and we have case conferences where everybody's presenting their challenging cases, and the residents are debating what the best approach is and all this, and multiple neurosurgeons will chime in, and ultimately somebody has to take the patient to the OR, and they've heard 10 other opinions from other good surgeons about that case before they go to the operating room. But when you're in private practice, you're by yourself, and literally I could go years without talking to another neurosurgeon if I wanted to, and I would only make decisions out of my own training and expertise and practice and experience. And for most patients, in most cases, that would be fine. But you know what? There's sometimes when it's not. There's sometimes when you need another person to say, hey, wait, did you see that paper in the Journal of Neurosurgery last month? Or have you read this article? Or did you see this thing that came out? Or have you practiced this? Did you go to this course? And somebody will say, hey, maybe instead of that, maybe you should try this, or maybe you should do that. That's why I'm still learning new things. I'm adding new technologies. I did a virtual reality neurosurgery case the other day because I want to make sure that I don't rely on my own understanding all the time. And that's the benefit that you get when you're raised by a strong father or somebody in your life who is a strong mentor, and you're willing to submit to them. I have a relative, I'm not going to say who it is, but a close relative, who would never submit to their father's wisdom. Like never. As a teenager, bucked up. Every time their dad tried to say, hey, this is probably a better way, they would buck up. Who are you to tell me? I'm 17 years old. I know, that sort of thing. But the problem is every teenager wants to do that, but he never grew out of it. Like as a college student, who are you to tell me I can do what I want? I don't live with you anymore. I don't have to follow this curfew. Or I don't have to do what you say and all that stuff. And so guess what happened? Like his life has played out in a series of tragedies that were all avoidable. If he had ever just let somebody give him some advice from time to time, somebody could have said, maybe you shouldn't marry that girl. This doesn't seem like a good, solid relationship to me. Maybe you shouldn't drop out of college here. Maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe you ought to think about this. He would never submit to that kind of leadership. And now his life has been a series of disasters. And so what I would just say is that you look at a person like that and you say, that person never was willing to come under the covering authority of a strong father or good leader in their life. You look at somebody like Bill Burgess, who left such a huge imprint on Rick and the great work that Rick's done in the world, and you see the fruit of wisdom of being willing to submit to a good leader. And that's what I want for you today. We're just mining some lessons from Bill Burgess's book, from Rick Burgess's book, Men Don't Run in the Rain, and some advice from other dads. I'll tell you one story about my dad that had a lot to do with framing me as a human. When I was a boy, about 14, I got a call from the rich guy in town. We had a small town in Oklahoma, and there was one guy that owned the phone company, the cable company, the newspaper, like every kind of service. Like everything that there was, he pretty much owned it. It was like Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. And he said, hey, your dad tells me that you're pretty smart with computers and you're good with technology, and I've got this TV station and I need some editing done and some videotape copying and some filming and stuff, and I could teach you, somebody could teach you that, and you could work for me at the TV station. And I thought, man, that's great. I'll have my first job that wasn't just working for my dad. That'd be great. And he asked me a bunch of questions and interviewed me. And at the end of the day, he said, I'm going to offer you this job, and I'm going to tell you why, because you're just a kid, but I'm going to tell you why I'm willing to hire you to do this important work for me. And I said, well, why, sir? Why would you do that? He said, because your dad, Wayne Warren, if your dad told me that he could stand flat-footed and jump up on top of this building that we're in, I would believe him, because he's the most honest man I ever met. And so I'm going to assume that you're that honest, and I'm going to hire you for this job. So my father's character opened a door for me when I was just 13 years old. My father's history of integrity and telling the truth and being an honest person made a difference for me in my life at that young age. And it showed me something that I've tried to keep close to me for my whole life, which is people are watching you. And they're watching you. And when you do the right thing, you honor your parents, but you also open doors in the future for your kids and the people around you. If somebody in my world asks me a question about somebody, when I answer them, it matters because they trust me. And that's why I know if I recommend a book to you or recommend a speaker, a guest on the show or whatever, you listen to me because you trust me. And I work hard and I try really hard to maintain that trust. That's a lesson that I learned from my father. And it's something that Rick Burgess learned from his father. And this whole idea of men don't run in the rain, that story we're going to talk about on the podcast in a few days. Make sure you get it. Get a copy of the book, wherever books are sold. Rick Burgess, his brand new book, Men Don't Run in the Rain. It's tremendous. Great example of how you can have your whole life shaped and molded by a good leader, by a good dad or a good father, a good mom, a good leader, a good mentor. And I think it's worth your while. I just wanted to share these 5 lessons with you today on spiritual brain surgery. So things that I've been pondering since I had the great honor to have a conversation with Rick last week. Be sure you check the Self Brain Surgery podcast out on Friday of this week for the full interview with Rick Burgess. It'll be on YouTube as well. And I just wanted to give you these 5 stories because I thought it might help you. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. Check out my newsletter, drleewarren.substack.com. It'll really help you smash neuroscience and faith together so that you can become healthier and feel better and be happier. And every week, I tell you the same thing. You can't change your life until you change your mind. And I want you to remember the most important part of that is that you can start today. I'm Dr. Lee Warren. It's been great to talk to you here today on spiritual brain surgery. God bless you, my friend. We'll talk to you soon.